The rancher's son found a wounded Apache girl in the barn. She only whispered one word before passing out. "Brother." The barn stood against the night, like a prayer half-spoken, its weathered boards drinking in the red light of the blood moon that hung fat and heavy above the Arizona territory. Thomas Hartley pushed through the door, the leather hinges groaning their familiar complaint, expecting nothing more than the sweet smell of hay and the soft shuffle of horses dreaming in their stalls. Instead, he found blood. It pooled dark and thick beneath a pile of straw in the corner where his father stored the winter feed. The metallic scent cut through the barn's comfortable mustiness like a blade through silk, and Thomas felt his 17-year-old heart stumble against his ribs. His lantern trembled in his grip, casting wild shadows that danced across the walls like spirits fleeing daylight. He should have turned around, should have walked back to the house where his father sat cleaning his rifle by lamplight, where his mother hummed old hymns while mending clothes, where everything was safe and known and white. But something in that dark corner pulled at him like a fishhook in his chest, reeling him forward step by careful step. The straw moved. Thomas nearly dropped the lantern. Oil sloshed inside the glass chimney, and the flame guttered, plunging half the barn into deeper shadow. When the light steadied, he saw her, a girl no older than himself, Apache by the look of her, curled like a wounded animal in the hay. Her doeskin dress was torn and stained with what looked like days of hard travel. Her long black hair fell across her face like a curtain drawn against the world. She was dying. Thomas could see it in the shallow rise and fall of her chest, in the way her skin had taken on the waxy pallor of tallow candles. Blood had soaked through the doeskin at her side, dark and wet and final. He knelt beside her, his boots crunching softly in the straw. Up close, he could see she was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful, fierce and fragile at the same time, like a hawk with a broken wing. Her face was sharp-boned and proud, even in unconsciousness, and there was something about the set of her mouth that spoke of words bitten back, of secrets held close to the heart. Thomas had seen Apache before, of course. They came to the trading posts sometimes, silent and watchful, their presence making the white settlers nervous and quick to reach for weapons. His father spoke of them with the careful respect a man might give to a rattlesnake, dangerous, but part of the desert's harsh arithmetic. His mother crossed herself when they were mentioned, whispering prayers for the souls of the heathen. But this girl, bleeding in his father's barn, was no abstraction. She was real and hurt and alone, and looking at her, Thomas felt something crack open inside his chest like an egg. He reached out, meaning to check if she still breathed, and her eyes snapped open. They were the color of deep water, dark and fathomless, and they fixed on his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The barn held its breath around them, full of the small sounds of night, mice scurrying in the walls, horses shifting in their sleep, the distant cry of a coyote calling to its pack. Then her lips moved. The sound that came out was barely more than a whisper, rough and broken like wine through dry leaves. "Brother." The word hung in the air between them, impossible and heavy. Thomas felt it settle into his bones like cold rain, and he knew with the certainty that comes in dreams that his life had just changed direction like a river bending around stone. She tried to say more, her mouth working soundlessly, but the effort was too much. Her eyes rolled back, showing white, and she sank deeper into the straw like something returning to the earth from which it came. Thomas sat back on his heels, his mind racing. Brother. What did she mean? He had no brothers, no siblings at all. His mother had tried for years to give his father more children, but God had seen fit to bless them with only one son. The girl was clearly fevered, probably seeing things that weren't there, speaking words that made no sense. But even as he told himself this, he knew it wasn't true. There had been something in her eyes when she spoke, a clarity that cut through the fog of pain and blood loss. She had meant something specific, something important enough to spend her dying breath on. He looked down at her still form, at the blood that continued to seep into the straw, and felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like a yoke. He could leave her here to die. It would be the safe thing, the sensible thing. Come morning, he could tell his father he'd found nothing but mice in the barn. They could bury her quietly in the desert, and no one would ever know she'd been here. Or he could try to save her. The thought terrified him. Harboring an Apache was dangerous business in this part of the territory. The army had been cracking down hard since the latest troubles, and feelings ran hot among the settlers. Men had been hanged for less. But looking at her, Thomas found he couldn't simply walk away. He thought of his mother's hands, gentle and sure when she tended the sick. He thought of the root cellar beneath the house, cool and dark and hidden from prying eyes. He thought of bandages and water and the delicate art of keeping someone alive when everything in the world seemed bent on their dying. The blood moon watched through the barn's high window as Thomas Hartley made his choice, its red light blessing or condemning. He couldn't tell which. He set the lantern aside and gathered the girl into his arms, surprised by how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the fever burning through her skin like banked coals. Her breathing was so shallow, he had to put his ear close to her lips to be sure she still lived. As he carried her toward the barn door, her word echoed in his mind, a mystery wrapped in dying breath and moonlight. Brother. The night air was cool against his face as he stepped outside, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled long and mournful, as if it knew that some roads, once taken, lead only deeper into the wilderness. Dawn came pale and unwelcome, crawling across the desert like something wounded. Thomas had not slept. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, staring at his hands, the same hands that had carried the Apache girl through the darkness, that had cleaned her wounds with water and torn cloth, that had hidden her in the root cellar beneath their kitchen floor, like a secret too dangerous to speak. Her fever had worsened through the night. Even now, he could hear her restless movements below, the soft murmur of words in a language he didn't understand. Sometimes she called out, and each cry felt like a stone dropped into the well of his chest. He had given her water when she could take it, had pressed cool rags to her burning forehead, but he was no doctor. He was just a rancher's son who had made a choice in the dark and now faced the terrible weight of mourning. The sound of horses cut through his thoughts like a blade through paper. Thomas moved to his window, pushing aside the faded curtain his mother had sewn from feed sacks. In the yard below, 6 men sat their mounts in a loose circle, their shadows long and dark against the dirt. He recognized most of them. Sheriff Garrett with his star catching the early light, Deputy Morrison whose hands never strayed far from his guns, and 4 others from town, all hard men with sunburned faces and eyes that had seen too much of the territory's harsh justice. His father stepped from the house, rifle cradled in his arms like a sleeping child. Even from above, Thomas could see the tension in Jacob Hartley's shoulders, the careful way he held himself when trouble came calling. His father was not a large man, but he had the kind of presence that made other men step back and think twice. The desert had carved him lean and careful, and 30 years of ranching had taught him to read weather in both sky and human faces. "Morning, Jacob," Sheriff Garrett called, touching the brim of his hat. "Sorry to trouble you so early." "No trouble," his father replied, though Thomas could hear the lie in it. "What brings you out this way?" "Apache trouble." The words fell flat and heavy in the morning air. "Had some attacks 2 days south of here. Raided the Henderson place, killed Old Tom, and took his youngest daughter. We've been tracking them, and the trail leads this direction." Thomas felt his heart stop, then start again with a painful lurch. Below in the cellar, the girl shifted, and he heard the soft scrape of her body against the wooden floor. He held his breath, praying she would stay quiet, stay hidden. "Haven't seen any Apache," his father said. "Been quiet out here." Sheriff Garrett nodded, but his eyes swept the yard, taking in the barn, the well, the small outbuildings that dotted the property like islands in an ocean of dust. "Mind if we take a look around?" Just to be sure. It wasn't really a question. Thomas knew that, and so did his father. In the territory, when the law came asking, you opened your doors and hoped they found nothing worth hanging you for. "Of course," Jacob said. "Thomas is inside. I'll call him down to help." "No need." Deputy Morrison spoke up, his voice carrying the edge of suspicion that seemed permanently lodged in his throat. "We can manage." Thomas watched the men dismount, their boots raising small clouds of dust that hung in the still air like smoke. They moved with the careful efficiency of hunters, spreading out to cover the barn, the chicken coop, the small shed where his father kept tools. His mouth went dry as desert sand. Below, the girl made a sound, half moan, half whisper. It seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the house. Thomas moved quickly, pulling on his boots and shirt, trying to look like someone who had been sleeping peacefully instead of sitting vigil over a dying Apache girl. He made noise on the stairs, called out a greeting to his father, anything to cover whatever sounds might drift up from the cellar. "Morning, Pa," he said as he stepped onto the porch, hoping his voice sounded steady. "What's all the commotion?" His father's eyes met his for just a moment, and Thomas saw something there, a flicker of knowledge, or perhaps just the sharp instinct of a man who knew his son too well. Jacob Hartley had eyes like a hawk, and he used them the same way, missing nothing that moved in his territory. "Apache raids," his father said simply. "Sheriff's just checking to make sure we're safe." The search took 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Thomas stood beside his father, watching the men poke through their life like children looking for hidden candy. They checked every stall in the barn, every corner where someone might hide. Deputy Morrison spent a long time examining the straw where the girl had bled, and Thomas felt sweat gather at the base of his neck despite the morning cool. But the men found nothing. The Apache girl remained hidden beneath their feet, burning with fever in the darkness of the root cellar, and Thomas learned that sometimes the worst lies were the ones you told with your silence. "Sorry for the trouble, Jacob," Sheriff Garrett said as the men mounted up again. "You see anything, any sign at all, you send word immediately. These particular Apache, they're not just raiding. They're looking for something specific." "What kind of something?" his father asked. The sheriff's face darkened. "Someone. They hit 3 ranches in 2 days, but they ain't taking cattle or horses. They're asking questions about a white boy who was took in a raid 5 years back. Boy named Michael Henderson." Thomas felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Henderson. The same name as the family that had just been attacked. The pieces of some vast puzzle began shifting in his mind, but he couldn't see the shape they made. "You remember that raid?" Sheriff Garrett continued. "Whole family killed except for the youngest boy. We figured he was dead too, but now it seems maybe the Apache kept him, raised him as one of their own." The horses began to move, kicking up dust as they turned toward the road. But Sheriff Garrett paused, looking back at the house with eyes that seemed to see too much. "Funny thing about Apache," he said, "they don't usually leave their wounded behind, but we found blood sign heading this way. Fresh blood. Keep your eyes open, Jacob. Sometimes what looks like coincidence is just trouble taking its time to arrive." The men rode away, leaving nothing behind but dust and the weight of unspoken questions. Thomas stood beside his father in the growing heat of the day, listening to the sound of hoofbeats fade into silence. When they were gone, Jacob Hartley set his rifle against the porch post and looked at his son with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of 30 years in hard country. "Son," he said quietly, "is there something you need to tell me?" The question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Thomas opened his mouth, felt the weight of truth pressing against his teeth like a caged bird. But before he could speak, a sound drifted up from beneath the house, a cry of pain so raw and desperate that it seemed to tear the morning air like cloth. His father's eyes never left his face. "Thomas." It wasn't a question anymore. It was a recognition, a father's knowledge of his son's heart written in the language of shared blood and years of trust. Thomas felt something break inside him, not painful, but necessary, like ice giving way to spring water. "She's hurt, Pa," he said, and the words came out smaller than he'd intended. "Real bad hurt. She was dying in our barn, and I couldn't let her die." Jacob Hartley nodded slowly, as if this was what he'd expected all along. His weathered hands hung loose at his sides, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of choices made and prices paid. "Son," he said, "there are some roads that, once you start walking them, You can't ever find your way back. Below them, the Apache girl cried out again, and Thomas realized that the hardest part wasn't choosing which road to take. It was learning to live with where it led you. The cellar smelled of earth and old potatoes, of secrets buried deep where sunlight never reached. Thomas sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, a bowl of cool water in his lap, and a rag in his hands that had long since warmed from the heat of the Apache girl's fever. Above them, he could hear his father's boots moving across the kitchen floor, slow and deliberate, the sound of a man wrestling with knowledge he wished he didn't possess. It had been 3 days since the sheriff's visit, 3 days of carrying water and food down the narrow wooden steps, of changing bandages and watching the girl drift between sleep and something deeper than sleep. Her wound was healing, slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. The fever, though, burned on like a fire that refused to die. She spoke in her sleep, sometimes in Apache, words that flowed like water over stone, musical and strange. Sometimes in English, fragments that came broken and scattered like pieces of a shattered mirror. Thomas had begun to piece them together, these fevered whispers, and what he found there made his chest tight with understanding. Michael. She said the name often, always with a longing that cut through the air like a blade. Michael Henderson, the white boy taken 5 years ago, raised Apache, now somewhere in the mountains with the band that had become his family. Her brother, not by blood but by something deeper, the bond of shared loss, of children stolen from one world and remade in another. He promised. She whispered now, her eyes closed but her lips moving with urgent need. Before the soldiers came, he promised he would wait. Thomas dipped the rag in cool water and pressed it to her forehead. Her skin was like heated metal, and he could feel the fever's restless energy beneath his palm. What did he promise? He asked softly. Her eyes opened then, dark and deep as mountain pools. For a moment they were clear, focused, seeing him instead of whatever ghosts haunted her dreams. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. You're not him, she said. No, Thomas agreed. I'm not, but I'm listening. She studied his face in the dim light that filtered down from the kitchen above. He had brought a small oil lamp, but he kept the flame low, afraid that too much light might somehow give them away. In the golden shadows, her features seemed carved from stone, sharp and proud despite the fever's ravages. Your people killed my family, she said, and there was no anger in it, just the flat statement of fact. In the place where the river bends. I was 7 winters old. Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew the place she meant, Bent River, where the cavalry had struck an Apache camp 3 years ago. His father had spoken of it with the grim satisfaction of a man who believed justice had been served. Thomas had been younger then, more willing to see the world in the simple terms his parents offered him. The soldiers came at dawn, she continued, her voice growing stronger as the memories poured out of her. They said we had stolen horses, killed white men. Maybe some had. Maybe they were right to be angry. But my father was a peaceful man. He grew corn and made baskets. He never lifted his hand against any white man. She paused, her breathing shallow but steady. Thomas wanted to speak, to offer some comfort, but he knew this was not his story to interrupt. The soldiers shot him as he stood in front of our wickiup, she said. Shot him down like a dog while my mother screamed. Then they shot her too. I ran. A child learns to run fast when the world catches fire around her. The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the earthen walls. Above them, Thomas heard his father's chair creak as he settled in for another long night of keeping watch. An old woman found me, the girl went on. Took me to the band that lived high in the mountains, where the air is thin and the soldiers do not like to go. She said I was her granddaughter now, that the dead had sent me to her for keeping. I believed her. I had to believe something. Thomas dipped the rag again, wrung it out carefully. What about Michael? Her eyes found his, and in them he saw something that might have been hope or might have been sorrow. He couldn't tell which. He came to us the next spring, 7 years old, with yellow hair and blue eyes like pieces of sky. The raiders brought him from a ranch near the border. His family was dead, killed in revenge for Bent River. The warriors wanted to raise him Apache, teach him to fight against his own people. It is an old way, taking the children of enemies and making them yours. She shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position on the blankets Thomas had arranged for her. The movement sent a wave of pain across her face, and she gritted her teeth until it passed. But he was different, she said when she could speak again. Not like other white children who were taken. They usually cried for their mothers, begged to go home. Michael never cried, never spoke of his old life. It was as if he had been born Apache, born to our ways. You became friends, Thomas said. More than friends. Brother and sister in all ways but blood. We learned together, grew together. The old woman taught us both the stories of our people, showed us how to read the signs in stone and sky. Michael learned to ride like the wind, to shoot an arrow through a moving rabbit's eye. But more than that, he learned to think like Apache, to see the world as we see it. The fever was rising again. Thomas could see it in the flush that spread across her cheeks, in the way her hands began to tremble. But she pushed on, as if the telling of this story was more important than the pain that consumed her. 2 years ago, the soldiers found our camp. Not all of it. We scattered when the scouts brought word. But they found the old woman, found her and killed her, and with her died the story she had not yet taught us. Michael was away hunting. When he returned and saw what had happened, something in him broke. She closed her eyes, and tears leaked from beneath the lids like water from a cracked stone. He said he would go back to the white world. Said he would find his family's killers and make them pay. But first, he said, he would come back for me. He would find a way to bring me home, to our people, to the band that still lived free in the high places. He made me promise to wait for him. Thomas felt the pieces clicking together in his mind like gears in a clock. But you didn't wait. I could not, she whispered. Word came that soldiers were moving into the mountains. A big force, with horses and guns and Apache scouts who had turned their backs on their own people. They were hunting the last free bands, hunting them like animals. I had to warn them, had to warn him. So you left. I left. But the soldiers were everywhere, and I was weak from hunger. They chased me for 3 days before I lost them in the canyon country. By then I was hurt, bleeding, half dead from thirst. I thought I would die in the desert, become bones for the coyotes to scatter. She opened her eyes again, looking at him with something that might have been gratitude. Instead, I found your barn. Found you. The lamp flame guttered lower, and Thomas realized he had forgotten to tend it. The oil was nearly gone, and soon they would be left in darkness. Above them, his father's boots had stopped moving. The house was quiet except for the sound of their breathing and the distant howl of wind across the desert. The brother you spoke of, Thomas said quietly. It's Michael Henderson. Yes. Michael who was white and became Apache. Michael who promised to come back for me and make us a family again among our people. Michael who may already be dead, killed by soldiers or time, or the simple cruelty of a world that takes everything from those who have already lost too much. The lamp flame died with a soft sigh, plunging them into darkness, so complete it seemed solid. Thomas sat perfectly still, listening to the girl's breathing, feeling the weight of her story settle into his bones like cold rain. "Why are you helping me?" she asked from the darkness. It was a question he had asked himself 100 times in the past 3 days. Why risk everything for a stranger, an enemy, someone his own people would kill without hesitation? He thought of a dozen answers, but when he spoke, only the truth came out. "Because you call me brother," he said. "And maybe because sometimes the right thing and the safe thing aren't the same thing at all." In the darkness, he heard her breath catch, as if his words had touched something deep inside her that she thought had died with everything else. "Thomas," she whispered, and it was the first time she had spoken his name. "If you help me reach the mountains, help me find Michael, I will owe you a debt that can never be repaid." "Maybe," he said, "some debts aren't meant to be repaid. Maybe they're just meant to be passed on." The fever broke on the 7th day, like storm clouds parting to reveal clear sky. Thomas knew the moment it happened because the restless energy that had consumed the Apache girl for a week simply vanished, leaving behind a stillness so complete it frightened him more than her delirium had. He found her sitting up in the cellar, her back straight and her dark eyes clear for the first time since he'd carried her from the barn. She had managed to braid her long hair, and someone looking at her now would see not a dying girl, but a young Apache woman preparing for a journey. The sight of her transformation made Thomas's chest tight with understanding. "You're leaving?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Her voice was steady, no longer roughened by fever. "Tonight, when the moon is dark, it will be safer then." Thomas set down the bowl of broth he'd brought, knowing she wouldn't need it now. Above them, he could hear his mother humming as she worked in the kitchen, the same old hymn she'd sung since his childhood. The sound seemed to come from a different world now, a place where sons helped their fathers with cattle and worried about nothing more dangerous than drought or wolves. "You won't make it alone," he said. "You're still weak, and it's 3 days hard riding to reach the foothills. The desert will kill you before you find your brother." She studied his face in the lamplight, her expression unreadable. "What are you saying?" Thomas felt the words forming in his mouth like stones, heavy and impossible to swallow back. "I'm saying I'll take you. I know the way to the mountains, know where the water is and where the army patrols. I can get you there alive." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of his mother's footsteps overhead. The Apache girl, he realized he still didn't know her name, looked at him with something that might have been surprise or might have been recognition of a choice she'd seen coming long before he had. "You would leave your family?" she asked. "Your home. I would keep my word," Thomas said, though he wasn't sure when he'd given it. Maybe it had been in the barn that first night, when he'd chosen mercy over safety. Maybe it had been every day since, each time he'd brought her water and watched over her healing. Or maybe it had been just now, when he'd seen her sitting upright and ready to face whatever came next. "Your father knows," she said. Thomas nodded. His father had known from the beginning, had read the truth in his sons, face the way a rancher read weather in the sky. They hadn't spoken of it directly, but Jacob Hartley wasn't a man who needed words to understand the shape of things. "He won't try to stop you." "He might try," Thomas said, "but he won't succeed. He raised me to make my own choices. I think he knew this day would come, maybe from the moment he saw me carrying you into the house." The girl was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt floor that might have been Apache symbols or might have been nothing at all. When she looked up again, her eyes held depths Thomas was only beginning to understand. "My name is Ayana," she said. "It means eternal blossom in the old tongue. The woman who raised me gave it to me when I was small, said it would help me remember that some things endure even when everything else is taken away." "Ayana," Thomas repeated, tasting the sound of it. It was beautiful, like water over stones or wine through sage. "If you do this," she said, "if you help me reach the mountains, you can never come back. Not to this life, not to these people. The army will hunt you as they hunt all Apache. Your own kind will call you traitor." Thomas thought of his mother's face, of the way she smiled when she served him breakfast each morning. He thought of his father's patient hands teaching him to read cattle sign and weather patterns. He thought of the girl he might have married someday, the children he might have raised on this land his family had carved from the wilderness. All would be gone. All of it would become memory, distant as stars. "I know," he said. Ayana reached out then, her fingers brushing his hand like the touch of bird wings. Her skin was warm now, no longer burning with fever, and he could feel the strength returning to her grip. "Why?" she asked, and it was the same question she'd posed in the darkness days before, but this time it carried different weight. Thomas looked at her, this Apache girl who had stumbled into his life, carrying nothing but wounds and a single word that had changed everything. He thought of Michael Henderson, somewhere in the high places, waiting for a sister who might never come. He thought of promises made under stars, of families scattered and remade, of the strange paths that led people to each other across impossible distances. "Because," he said finally, "maybe there's more than one way to be a brother." They prepared through the afternoon like soldiers readying for battle. Thomas gathered supplies, food that would travel well, water skins, ammunition for his father's old rifle, blankets that could turn aside mountain cold. He worked quietly, methodically, trying not to think about the finality of each choice. His father found him in the barn as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Jacob Hartley stood in the doorway like a man surveying damage after a storm, his weathered face showing nothing of what he felt. "Son," he said. "Bah, you sure about this?" Thomas looked up from the pack he was filling, meeting his father's eyes directly. "No, sir. I'm not sure about anything, but I'm doing it anyway." Jacob nodded slowly, as if this was the answer he'd expected. He walked to the stall where Thomas's horse waited, running his hand along the animal's neck with the unconscious affection of a man who'd spent his life with horses. "This mare will take you where you need to go," he said. "She's got bottom and she's got sense. Trust her when the trail gets hard." "Yes, sir. And son." Jacob turned back to face him, and Thomas saw something in his father's expression he'd never seen before. Not sadness exactly, but the look of a man watching something precious slip beyond his reach. "Your mother don't know." "Not yet, but she will come morning. I'll tell her you had to go, that you had a debt to pay. She'll understand in time." Thomas felt his throat close up. "I don't," Jacob said quietly. "Don't make this harder than it already is. Just remember who you are and where you come from. Whatever happens up in those mountains, whatever you become, remember that you're my son and this is your home." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them like smoke. Then Jacob pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch that clinked softly as he handed it over. "$silver," he said. "Not much, but might help. And this." He pressed a folded paper into Thomas's other hand. "Letter of credit from the bank in Tucson. If things change, if you need to start over somewhere, it'll give you a stake." Thomas stared at the paper, understanding flooding through him like cold water. His father had been preparing for this moment, had seen it coming and made ready the only way he knew how. "I can't take this," he whispered. "You can and you will," Jacob said firmly. "It's a father's job to give his son what he needs to make his way in the world. This is what I'm giving you." Night fell like a curtain across the desert, bringing with it the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow sound and light alike. Thomas and Ayanna moved through it like ghosts, leading his horse across the hardpan toward the distant mountains that showed only as darker shapes against the star-filled sky. Behind them, the lights of the Hartley ranch grew smaller and smaller until they were lost among the desert's scattered points of brightness. Ahead lay country that Thomas knew only from maps and stories, places where Apache bands still moved free and soldiers played deadly games of hunt and hide. "Are you afraid?" Ayanna asked as they walked. Thomas considered the question, tasting the truth of it. "Yes," he said, "but not of dying. I'm afraid of failing you, of getting you killed because I don't know enough about your world." "Then we will learn together," she said. Michael always said that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. They walked on through the cooling night, two figures moving through vastness toward an uncertain future. Behind them lay the known world of ranches and settlements, of laws written by white men and enforced with bullets. Ahead lay the mountains where different laws held sway, where a white boy had become Apache and where promises made in darkness might finally be kept. The desert stretched around them like an ocean of silence, and in that silence, Thomas began to understand that some journeys changed not just where you were, but who you were. With each step away from his father's land, he felt himself becoming someone new, not quite white, not yet Apache, but something in between, something the world had no name for yet. By dawn, they would be deep in country where such distinctions mattered less than the simple fact of being alive, and Thomas thought maybe that was enough for now.